Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this West County feasibility study, our stakeholder meeting number 3. I'm Kent Gilpey, Director of Engineering at Sonoma Water. Shortly, we'll go through introductions and agenda when I hand this over to Sam, but I just wanted to express appreciation, thank everybody for their continued participation in these stakeholder committee meetings. For those who've been here for multiple meetings. If there's any new on here that haven't participated before, thank you for joining in. As we're continuing on our effort here, evaluating potential regional wastewater solutions in the West County, as part of this third meeting, we're going to be presenting some additional information from staff and from our consultant, Yost. So we welcome your input. We hope you had an opportunity to review some of the information that's been distributed ahead of time. I do want to be sensitive to time on these opening remarks, but I just want to emphasize your critical role and a much appreciated role in participating. We're going to need to be able to identify at the end of this, hopefully a feasible and preferred alternative that's got broad community support, that meets regulatory gets regulatory buy-in and has support from our electeds. And so your role is really key to helping us reach this point of identifying such a preferred alternative and opening up doors, hopefully, for finding the mechanism by we can fund whatever project we end up on, as opposed to just kind of continuing to spin on these tough wastewater challenges that we face for these small wastewater systems. So thank you again for your participation. I will say quickly on an encouraging news front, one small element of regionalization, a first step, this Occidental to Grayton pipeline project. We have got some encouraging news as of yesterday as to the award of that money and that being approved as of yesterday, so that hopefully will allow Sonoma Water to move forward on a design and some environmental work for a pipeline that could enhance that connection between Occidental and Grayton. And lastly, I'll just mention at a board meeting yesterday discussing sanitation rates. I know there's been comments in the stakeholder group before. I'm sorry I missed the last stakeholder meeting, but about the political will behind whatever solution gets landed on. And I did hear pretty clearly from our board yesterday a sense of urgency related to some of the small wastewater systems that Sonoma Water's involved in managing, but them reiterating to staff the urgency of getting after strategic approaches to solving some of these challenges. And the West County feasibility study is one that was mentioned in the discussion. So as to the concept of there being political will, at least from our board, it's encouraging to hear that there is that political will to address these issues head on. So with that as opening remarks, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sam Magill, who's going to tell us, I think you're going to facilitate our introductions and go through our agenda. So Sam, you can take it from here.
Well, thanks so much, Kent. I think I've met most of the folks on the line. I'm Sam Magill. I'm a facilitator with Sacramento State University. Really happy to be assisting Sonoma Water and the consultant team with facilitation of this West County water quality and recycled water supply feasibility study. As Kent mentioned, this is the third stakeholder meeting. A couple of quick logistical nuts and bolts before we get moving. Since we're on Zoom and there's a pretty good turnout today, I would ask that you keep yourself on mute if you're not actively addressing the group. So for those joining via Zoom, just click on the little mute button by your name. For those joining us just by the phone, and we do have 2 folks calling in, you can mute and unmute yourself using *6. There's going to be a series of conversation breaks throughout the day today, and we'll use the hand raise feature to get in that queue. Or if you're joining by phone, feel free to unmute again using *6. *9 also works, and just mention that you'd like to get in the conversation queue. So nuts and bolts out of the way. If you have any questions, feel free to submit those via the chat function throughout the day. Staff will be keeping an eye on that. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can, in addition to giving quite a bit of time to discussing the study results, or sorry, preliminary draft alternatives. Here we go. Let's take a quick look at our agenda today. After a round of introductions in just a moment, we're really going to be discussing three primary things today. First is a very quick review of the study's scope of work and timeline. Parastou Hooshialsadat is here from Sonoma Water as the project team lead. She's going to run you through the study scope and timeline, just to again kind of ground you in the process where we are right now, and where we see the project moving forward over the coming months. And then we will turn it over to Kathryn Gies. Kathryn's with West Yost Engineering as part of the engineering team, and she will discuss the study alternatives themselves and a review of the selection criteria and methodology for how the engineering team arrived at those alternatives. For those that attended the last meeting, we did go over the alternatives at that time, but there was clearly a strong request to better understand the methodology and the process for selecting those alternatives. So we hope to get into that during this presentation. I'll also note, and Kent alluded to it, you all received, and I believe, I'll check with staff, but that it's posted to the website as well, a fairly extensive summary document of all of the alternatives and the criteria themselves. It's really important. Hopefully folks have had a chance to read that. That's going to be kind of the cornerstone of our discussion today. And if you had a chance to review it, we'll be able to move through the material just that much more clearly. Andrea also just posted the link to the West County Feasibility Study webpage, and that document is posted online as well. The other thing that I will note, for those on the Stakeholder Committee distribution list, I mentioned it in my reminder email on Monday. That summary document that I just mentioned, the first time it went out, there was a minor error in table 2 of that document that showed zero cost for conveyance for all of these options. Obviously, for any of you in the wastewater space, you know that conveyance does cost money. So that table was updated. And I believe, I'll look to Andrea, but I believe the correct version with updated table 2 is available on the website now. Is that accurate, Andrea? Yeah.
I'll double check, see if we got that swapped out.
Wonderful. Thank you. We can also email it to you directly if you need another copy. So we'll run through the presentation of both the alternatives and the criteria. We'll break after each one of those items just very, very quickly for any clarifying questions. But really, it's all about item number 6 here. We want to have a discussion of the alternatives and the criteria and find out, has the engineering team come pretty close to hitting the mark? Are there additional modifications that need to be made? And at the end of that discussion, we're actually going to conduct a poll. We had tried to do this at the last meeting, poll you on your kind of preferred alternative, but it was really clear that you wanted more information, like I said, around the criteria and methodology. So we are hoping to get through that poll today, and based on what you hear, any decision you make today, it doesn't mean it's set in stone. We're just trying to figure out if it's headed in the right direction and what comments you have about the alternatives as they stand right now. It's our goal to get you out of here no later than 6 o'clock. But with that, why don't I do a quick run through, a quick round of introductions. So I'll just read your name off, and if you can introduce yourself, that would be great. I will start at the top of my list with Andrea Rodriguez.
Andrea Rodriguez, Communications Manager, and that current link on the website is not up to date, so we will get that swapped out for the group. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I will note that the correct table is going to be included in this presentation today, so you'll have that right in front of you. Next on my list, I have Kathryn Gies.
Hi, this is Kathryn from West Yost Associates. And just one quick note about that swap out. It was really just the naming in the rows that was wrong. The total costs are correct. So even if you're looking at the wrong table, just the recycled water cost is the $0 line and the conveyance cost is the high cost line. So it was just so you know.
That's very helpful. The bottom line is unchanged regardless. So thank you, Kathryn. All right, Chad Davison.
Hello, I'm Chad Davison. I'm manage Forestville Water District and Grayton Community Services District.
Thanks, Chad. And dialing in, we're joined by 707-331-0350. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, this is Carlos Diaz, Deputy Director of Engineering for Sonoma Water, and I have to be on my mobile today because I'll be traveling. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. Appreciate you joining. Rich Holmer.
Yeah, this is Rich Homer, long-term resident of Villa Grande in the Lower Russian River area. I'm also president of the board of the Sweetwater Springs Water District and on the Monterey Villa Grande CAG.
Great, thanks, Rich. Steve Trippy.
Hi, I'm Steve Trippy. Thanks for inviting me. Longtime Monterey resident. I'm a co-chair of the Lower Russian River Citizens Advisory Group.
Thanks, Steve. Alexis Verberkmos.
Hi, I'm a resident of the Lower River area and just sort of very nerdily interested in finding great sewage solutions for our part of the county. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexis. Brian Grant.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for the invitation to attend. It's a very interesting topic. My name is Brian Grant, and I am a long-term resident of Monterey, and I also sit on the Monterey Villa Grande Citizens Advisory Committee.
Thanks, Brian. Dan Fain.
Hi, Dan Fine. I'm with Steve Trippy, co-chair of the Monterey Villa Grande CAG, and longtime Monterey resident. Previously, I was on a different group called the Monterey Wastewater Task Group, where we also were looking at alternatives for the Monterey Villa Grande area.
Well, thanks, Dan. Dave Coleman.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Coleman, Senior Principal at Burrell Jane Race Consulting Engineers. We're performing the Monterey Villa Grande pilot project study. I'm also unofficially here because I'm the district engineer for the Forestville Water District, and I'm a Forestville resident.
Thanks, Dave. George Lincoln.
Afternoon, everyone. George Lincoln. I am your operations engineer for the Russian River treatment plant.
Well, thanks, George. Kyla Brook.
Kyla Brook, longtime resident of Villa Grande, also on the Citizens Advisory Group, and I represent the interagency team to talk about issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyla. Matt Herman.
Right, this is Matt Herman, Water Resource Control Engineer with North Coast Regional Water Board, and I'm be sitting on this just to listen in.
Wonderful, thank you. Mona Doherty.
Hi, I apologize. It was not unmuting. Hi, I'm Mona Doherty. I'm the supervisor for the NPDES wastewater and water recycling unit at the North Coast Regional Water Board. So I work with Tina Lowe and Matt Herman, who are on this call.
Great, thanks, Mona. Parastou Hooshialsadat.
Hi, this is Parastou, and I am the project manager for the technical portion of the feasibility study with West Yost.
Thanks, Parastou. Tina Lowe.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tina Lowe. I'm a water resource control engineer, and I focus on recycled water planning and permitting.
Great, thanks, Tina. Todd Hunsdorfer.
Hi, everybody. I am Todd Hunsdorfer. I'm the new clean water analyst and ombudsman for Sonoma County, and I'm particularly struck by the very specific geographic representation of our community members here today, and I'm hoping somebody takes note of that.
Thanks, Todd. All right, last on my list, 707-869-0410. If you could unmute yourself and introduce yourself, that would be wonderful.
Okay, I'm Brenda Edelman, Russian River Watershed Protection Committee, and also I'm on the Monterey-Ville Grand CAG. And I have to call on the phone because my computer crashed, and I may have to write my comments because I've been rushing around all day trying to deal with things, and I had made a bunch of notes on this, but I don't know if I'll be able to talk about it much in the meeting. But I'll be sure to get them to you in the near future.
Great, thanks so much, Brenda. All right, let's go ahead and jump into our agenda. So as I mentioned, well, first let me check. Did I miss anybody on the list? Okay, let's go ahead and jump into it then. So I want to hand it over to Parastou to walk through the study scope of work and an overview of the timeline. Parastou?
Sure, thank you. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so before we go into the details, it's important to understand why this study is happening. The scope of work you see here was developed as part of an administrative civil liability or ACL order number R1 2023-0049 issued by the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. This means feasibility study is a requirement intended to address ongoing compliance issues and look at long-term solutions for wastewater management in West County. So with that in mind, here's what the study will focus on. First, we are assessing whether it's feasible and beneficial to consolidate the 4 existing wastewater districts, including Russian River County Sanitation District, Occidental County Sanitation District, Grayton Community Services District, and Forestville Water District in the region. We are analyzing capacities, operations, costs, and whether regionalization could improve services. So that's where we are right now. Second, the feasibility study looks at the potential for regional projects to provide wastewater services to unserved communities. The ACL specifically calls out the communities of Hacienda, Hollydale, Monterey, Villa Grande, Camp Meeker, and Gurneville. Many of these areas currently rely on septic systems. Regionalization could provide a path for these communities to come into compliance with the pathogen total maximum daily load or TMDL requirements. Third, we are looking at how much recycled water could be produced for reuse things like irrigation, landscaping, or industrial purposes. This will help us conserve kind of our drinking water supply. And finally, we are kind of exploring how regionalization can improve our ability to temper the impacts of drought, floods, and fire hazards, and to ensure that our wastewater systems are more resilient to climate change. And again, it's important to know that this study is just the first step. It's not about designing or building anything yet. It's about gathering the information, identifying options, responding to the requirements set forth in the ACL order, and what would make sense for the community moving forward. If we can go to the next slide. So here is a look at the overall timeline for the regionalization study, which runs from late 2024 through 2026. We began this process with the service area description workshop on August 27, 2024, led by the Technical Advisory Committee, you can see as TAC here. This workshop laid the foundation for the feasibility study. In October 2024, we held our first committee meetings to discuss the study's purpose, the area of focus, and to review and establish the committee charter. Following that, the West Yost consulting team conducted site visits to wastewater treatment plants within the study area. They met with plant operators and reviewed relevant studies, plans, and regulatory documents for each location. In February 2025, we hosted a public meeting to present and discuss potential regionalization alternatives, along with the selection criteria and scoring methodology. During that meeting, we received feedback, as it was mentioned a couple of times, requesting more detail on how the alternatives were ranked and selected. In response to that feedback, we distributed a summary of the selection criteria and a scoring table showing how each alternative was evaluated prior to this meeting. Today, we will continue that discussion and hope everyone has had a chance to review the materials. And at the end of this presentation, we will ask committee members to indicate their preferred alternatives through the polls that Sam mentioned. So looking ahead to summer 2025, we will explore opportunities for unsold properties in the economically disadvantaged communities of Hacienda, Holydale, Camden Care, and Garnerville to potentially connect to the regional system. We will also assess the cost of those connections. Additionally, we'll coordinate with the Monterey Villa Grande sewer pilot study to ensure their solutions are incorporated into our feasibility study effort. In the fourth quarter of 2025, we will present a preferred set of alternatives considering unsold communities, recycled water options, and climate change resiliency. We will then submit the draft feasibility study to the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. In 2026, we will focus on reviewing both the draft and final versions of the study with the committee and prepare the project advancement report. So while the 2026 dates are still to be determined, your input throughout this process, especially at key points now and along in 2025, is critical. We want to make sure that your voice helps shape these decisions. With that, I'm just going to turn it back to Sam. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Parastou. And I want to go back real quickly to a comment that Todd made during the introductions, just pointing out to the geographic location of many of the folks joining us today. I know a lot of you are from the Monterey and Villa Grande area in the lower Russian River. Again, just pointing back to what Parastou said, the unsewered community priority ranking discussion, that's going to happen at the next meeting. It has not been forgotten. It is very much part of this discussion, but I just want to make sure folks are aware. And again, that meeting is scheduled for August 27th of this year. So I'll go ahead and pause here before we go over to Kathryn for a breakdown of the alternatives and the criteria themselves. And see if anybody has any clarifying questions just on the scope and the timeline. So again, just questions on the scope and timeline. Any questions? Okay, we're going to move through this pretty quickly since at the end of the day, we're really here to get your feedback on the alternatives and the criteria themselves. So with that, let me go ahead and hand it to Kathryn.
Hello, everyone. Jump to the next slide. So I'm going to go through the alternatives just from a high level overview, just so everyone is oriented as we get into the discussion of the ranking. And this is a repeat from the last meeting, and there is more detail in the memo that can be downloaded. So with the phase that we've been through so far, we started with a large universe of options. Basically 8 different scenarios. We have 3 scenarios that are referred to as local facility scenarios, 2 that are export scenarios, and then 3 that are export scenarios, And then 2 that are a combination of keeping some wastewater local and exporting some of it. Next slide. So the local facility scenarios are broken into 3 different, like I said, 3 different scenarios. So one involves basically keeping wastewater treatment plant at 2 different hubs. One hub is the Russian River County Sanitation District wastewater treatment plant, and which would be a service hub for wastewater service in that area. And then the other would be a treatment facility that combines the resources provided currently at the Grayton and the Forestville treatment plants. And that would become a service hub for that area, including the occidental flows, which were mentioned earlier. Excuse me one second. My goodness. Alternative 1B, the second local facility scenario, that would basically be consolidating all wastewater treatment plant at the Russian River plant. And 1C would be the opposite, basically creating one new treatment facility that would be at the Forestville treatment plant that would treat all of the wastewater within the project area. Next slide. So with the export scenarios, we were looking at basically sending the water either to the Windsor or to the Santa Rosa treatment plant or to both facilities. So under 2A, all 4 facilities would be exported to the Windsor treatment plant. Under 2B, all 4 facilities would be discharged to the Santa Rosa treatment plant. And under 2C, we would effectively split the flow, where we would look at the northern utilities, those north of the river would go towards Windsor, and the utilities south of the river would go towards Santa Rosa. Next slide. And then with the combination scenarios, the idea here is that it may be more efficient for either one half of the facilities to export while the others remain local, or vice versa. So with 3A, that would involve a local Russian River County Sanitation facility, and then with everything south of the river from Forestville, Grayton, and Occidental being exported to Windsor. And then 3B is just the opposite of that, with a local Forestville, Grayton facility, and then everything north of the river from Russian River going out towards Windsor. Next slide.
Thanks, Kathryn. I think that's a very succinct overview of the scenarios themselves. So the important thing to remember is that there are the scenarios are broken into 3 buckets. There's 3 alternatives associated with local treatment, 2 that just rely on export, and then the 2 you see up on your screen here that are a combination of both. Again, want to pause just for clarifying questions. I know there was a lot more detail in that summary memo, but any questions about the alternatives themselves? And Kathryn's going to go into a lot more detail about costs associated with these and the criteria in just a moment. Questions? Yeah, Todd, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I think you'll get into this, but one of the things I want to underline maybe is that these infographics are absent of some of the considerations that have made their way into the table, and I'm thinking specifically about, sort of the opportunity to pick up other communities. It seems, this is just like a very high level infographic that doesn't show a path, a pipeline, right? And so I just want to flag that. It could be very anxiety inducing, I'm sure, for people to say, hey, wait a second, our community is being left out. But I'm just trying to call attention to the fact that this is purely for, demonstrating a very high level option description, right? Am I right about that? Okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Thank you for pointing that out.
We'll get into some more of the details in just a moment here. Thanks for flagging that, Todd. Steve.
Just to continue on that a little. Just to continue on that a little bit. What I can infer from this is that the study that's going to happen this summer would build on picking up a lot more parcels on the 2 Windsor area, which are all the unsewered communities that you mentioned, right?
That is correct. So the idea here is that we're trying to get down from, 8 and sort of the universe of options that might be viable regional solutions. Initially bring those down to, a more reasonable number, which is the process we're in now. And then evaluate that subset at a more detail. And then we might take that subset, narrow it down to even fewer number. And then so to kind of figure out like what are really like the 3 most like viable options, 3 to 5. And then from those 3 to 5, then we add in what each of those look like with unsewered populations from all of the communities. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to identify 10 to 12, something in that range, what we're calling community clusters of unsewered communities that, include folks that are on this call, I'm sure, that are in some of the most critical areas adjacent to the river, that type of thing. And then for each option that makes it through this first screening process, we will say, what would it cost to add each of these, all 12, if we have 12, to this alternative? So once we go through this, so the goal here is to figure out because it would be a enormous task to look at that for 8 different options, right? So we're trying to get down to what are like the top 3. So then we can say within those, what do these look like once we expand them to cover all of these, high priority unsewered areas as well. With the goal of really identifying, what's the approach that's going to be most economical along the way, as well as, kind of some of the infrastructure that might be required if we were really going to, bring in every single, key community cluster that we identify.
Well, that should be the goal. I mean, if you're going to solve the problem, let's solve the problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. All right. We can certainly circle back around and we'll have a lot of time to discuss the merits of the individual alternatives themselves, but let's go ahead and take a look at the methodology and criteria next.
Okay.
Kathryn.
Yep, go ahead.
Right.
Okay, so at this high screening level, we developed what we call order of magnitude costs, just to give a sense of the range of costs for each option. And we break that into 3 categories here in this table. The first row being treatment, and as you can see, the cost is shown as a range because again, we're still very much at a high level. Like we've identified generally what infrastructure is needed, we've assigned it a cost number to it. And in the next phase, these cost numbers are going to get better refined. So just keep that in mind. So for now, this is just kind of to give us a ballpark of what we're talking about cost-wise relative to each other. So we have the treatment cost in the first row. That includes all of the treatment infrastructure needed to support the alternative, including, any needed improvements to meet water quality objectives for surface water discharge, any improvements needed, known improvements related to condition, as well as any capacity improvements that district may need to just address its own service area growth plans. So the idea here is to really say, what is it going to cost, for these facilities just to kind of continue doing what they're doing under some of these regional approaches. The conveyance cost, that represents the pipelines that connect the facilities that are needed in order to implement some of these options. I will note that the treatment cost for some of the export options, I should note that is essentially the connection fee to the agencies that we've been working with and what it would cost to basically buy into the treatment capacity at those sites. And then the recycled water cost, so the conveyance includes conveyance of the raw wastewater as well as conveyance of recycled water, like to other areas in some cases. So it's all sort of bundled into there. Under the recycled water line, that just represents storage and land application areas that may be needed to dispose of the water that's anticipated to be generated. So we took all these costs, added them up, and then converted that cost number to a score. So a high score of 5 means it's the lowest cost option, and a low score would be the lowest. So from this, you can see that the 2 local facility options is the lowest cost, and that's primarily because you don't have a lot of that conveyance connecting the facilities together. But keep in mind, that could potentially be the highest cost once we start bringing in unsewered populations, because now we don't have a big pipeline going across the county that people can connect into. So some of the other options that are at the low end would be the regional export options. And again, that's because we're now exporting the wastewater, pretty significant difference for distance outside of the county. Maybe I'll pause here for a minute on the cost, because I know that folks sometimes might have some questions about this, if that's okay.
Absolutely. And just one note, I mentioned the updated table. So it was just these 2 labels, conveyance and recycled water, that were switched in the original. But the current table that you see up here reflects the best available current knowledge. Questions for Kathryn on the cost analysis ranking?
Kathryn, go ahead.
Thank you. So to clarify what the recycled water cost is, you said that included storage and additional pipeline to, I think you said dispose. Do you mean to get that out to additional users that are not?
Yeah, it actually includes storage and then expansion of land application areas. What we found with this analysis was that the between the Forestville and the Grayton communities and the recycled water customers they serve, there is more demand there than what those 2 communities can deliver. So we found that if we could get water to that system, which is in the conveyance cost, we could actually use that water beneficially within that system. So the costs are 0 for a lot of these because we were able to effectively rely on that system. Under alternative 1A, that assumes that the Forestville and Grayton plants go to like a 0 surface water discharge. So they would have to build some storage ponds in order to store all that water, but we actually believe we could use all that water beneficially that would be stored. So that approach has that higher cost in there, and that's primarily to build that storage. And then with the export options to the Santa Rosa system, we were informed from the Santa Rosa folks that they would likely charge some cost related to recycled water management, and without really a clear picture of what that would be, but we assigned some cost to that. But I want to clarify that under the 1 facility at Russian River CSD option, where it's got 0 recycled water cost, that is because we're assuming that we're actually conveying all the recycled water from Russian River back to the Forestville system. So the Forestville system could accommodate that flow, but we do have, you can see, a higher conveyance system cost under 1B than we do under 1C, and that is why. So that is a good question. You're welcome.
Hand up from Brian Grant.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you so much for the information and the description about the numbers. I just had a question about if it's determined that any of the local facilities have either expansion needs or storage capacity issues or deficiencies in any way with their system. Do these numbers include what would be the upgrades for those systems to get them up and running to be compliant if there are? Okay.
Yep, that's exactly what they include. Yep.
Thank you. Steve.
Oh, same question.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Any other questions on the preliminary cost analysis? Okay, let's keep moving.
Okay, so in addition to the costs, we looked at some qualitative criteria related to each of these options, and I'll just kind of go through these quickly. So we looked at, the reliability and ease of operation. So that was just looking at, is the infrastructure easy to operate and maintain for the agencies? If we have multiple facilities versus less, and the complexity of the system really. Long-term regulatory compliance. So all of the options do result in a compliant solution. So this is more looking beyond just the current permit or the next permit, but like long term, which of the options might be more robust when it comes to meeting regulatory requirements. And then, and what are the risks down the road? Or what are the risks even, is one system more robust from a, reliability of even meeting criteria versus others. The third criteria is flexibility for adding unsewered communities. So like I said, so at this stage, we're looking at this only qualitatively. So if an alternative has an alignment that goes through or across, West County and through some unsewered areas, that's going to rank very high for this criteria versus one that does not. And then, like I said, in the next stages, we'll actually assign cost and facilities associated with that. But for now, we wanted to capture it just through qualitative. We had local recycled water benefits, and this was actually broken out on request from the regional board. So does it support local West County recycled water? So environmental really gets more into like impacts to floodplains, wetlands, endangered species, the costs and efforts associated with handling solid waste, energy efficiency. So kind of a whole slew of, environmental sustainability kind of factors applied there. Then with resiliency, this is more related to, the infrastructure and is it vulnerable flooding or climate change or seismic impacts. And then finally, ease of implementation. So that's everything related to like ease of construction, governance structure. Is it going to be complex to like create a whole new governance structure for this option? Or is it going to be fairly straightforward? And then also like, could the project be phased easily? Could it be broken into smaller pieces that would make it easier to implement? And so next slide. So I welcome you to learn more about how we came up with these rankings. They're all spelled out in a lot of detail. There's a very detailed version of this table in the memo that talks about how we came up with these numbers for each option. It's a little too complicated to get into this today. But if there's something specific, if someone did read the memo or you have a question specific from that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. But the bottom line is if you look across the bottom row, the highest ranked numbers, the higher numbers are higher ranked. And so we've got, the export options being pretty high ranked, do a lot to, the reliability and long-term regulatory compliance, the idea that, these options kind of like consolidate resources and bring a lot of benefits. And some of the lower ranked options were one, kind of looking at, treating only at the Russian River facility. And then, the two that involve treating at the Russian River, and a lot of that has to do with just the vulnerabilities and some of the issues associated with that plant. As well as its kind of remote location compared to, say, the Forestville plant, which is a little more centrally located and has a lot more opportunities and access for recycled water, that type of thing. So any questions about the qualitative criteria or the qualitative ranking?
Yeah, I had some questions. I'm just trying to get organized here.
No worries.
One of the category, one category that I was interested in, well, two categories, frankly, was sort of the environmental and resiliency categories. And, I know in the report, there was a good job sort of identifying the complexity of the new infrastructure that would be required and the number of stream crossings. And I'm wondering if you could speak to sort of how the number of stream crossings influenced both the environmental and the resiliency criteria, because I could imagine that having sort of a detrimental effect on the overall scoring.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to remind myself exactly, but I am pretty sure that we did consider that in the environmental factor in terms of, potential to, as you're crossing the streams and, there's like wetlands and, other habitat associated with those stream crossings that need to be considered. I'm not sure we built it into the resiliency. I know we considered more on the resiliency, like building pipe along the Russian River and how that might be, for long distance and how that might be less resilient than some of the possible other alignments. But there's a couple of alignments that we could consider, I think, for that too. So it was considered, but I don't think we did build in the stream crossings to the resiliency.
Oh, yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think it probably would have been, you don't want to be double counting things anyway, too.
That too. But, and I will say this too, I appreciate this input and, as we move forward, with, kind of screening this down to say maybe from 8 options down to 5 or 3 today, input that we receive from the community on how to apply these criteria like that is very much appreciated, because we may say, well, maybe we didn't consider that stream crossing well enough. Maybe we should as we continue to look at these more. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, thanks. You answered a lot of my other questions that I had that had come up for me in reading this. Mostly I think maybe it came up in a previous community meeting about how these scores were weighted across the criteria, and it seems like they're all sort of given equal weight, which I'm imagining is a future conversation like you were just referencing. Because
yeah, exactly. The next slide will get a little bit into how we looked at it at this level, but right now that's equal weight as shown here.
And then the other thing I wanted to get some clarity on was the decision to sort of disassociate the quantitative ranking from the qualitative ranking, because I think if you combine them, it actually alters the final scoring. And I'm not saying that one is preferred over the other, and it's probably good to have them unrelated, because they can fluctuate so much and there are very different ways of weighting the score. But I just wanted to point that out, that the top choice in the qualitative ranking was obviously was right near the sort of the bottom of the quantitative ranking. And so what does that do to the way we talk about this solution?
That's right. And so actually the next slide, I think that really gets into that as well. So maybe.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's fine. It's totally fine. I think I'll explain to you kind of where we were now when we get to the next slide, and then sort of what the next phase will look like in terms of, better dialing in that analysis.
And I'll also note before we move on, one of the poll questions that we'll be asking all of you towards the end is to rank kind of the order of importance of these qualitative criteria from your perspective as well. So that will also feed into that eventual weighting and the discussion that will happen later.
And sorry, I had one more question that I meant to ask too, was with regard to the long-term regulatory compliance, what role did sort of the opportunity for integrating unsewered communities influence the scoring there? Because I'm thinking about capacity and everything.
It did not, because the flexibility for adding unserved communities was addressed as its own criteria. So kind of back to your earlier comment, we did not want to double count it. So the long-term reliability regulatory compliance is really specifically related to, this treatment, the type of treatment we're providing, where we are discharging and how we're discharging, how robust is that from a regulatory compliance standpoint. And then the unsewered portion was its own separate criteria.
Oh, and My sense was that the adding unsewered communities was really focused on like alignment with the pipes and not so much about whether the facilities could handle unsewered communities. But I'm misunderstanding that.
I think it did account for the ability of to accept flows
Okay,
as well.
great.
Yes.
Yeah, apologize
Yeah.
then. I didn't see that. So thanks.
Okay.
Hand up from Steve.
Yeah, just real quick. It seems like some of these things are not like the others, in that some of them seem like baseline, minimum, gotta do it things, and then others are things that you can rank and compare. I mean, all of them got to deal with long-term regulatory issues. All of them have to deal with the environmental issues. All of them have to deal with resiliency. And it seems like there's a baseline threshold. So if you ask me to rank those in order of importance, I don't know what I'd do. The other things are sort of other things to consider as we're moving forward that I can actually rank, but I just don't see them as parallel. And they're being treated as such here. I don't think the state board is going to want to pursue a strategy that isn't resilient, address environmental issues, and make sure it's going to address long-term regulatory compliance.
No, 100%. And I think the way, I think like for some of these like long-term regulatory compliance, it's a good example where, we've got some options that involve discharging to a brand new Windsor wastewater treatment plant that's going to have state-of-the-art nutrient removal and filtration and all of this stuff, right? From a long-term regulatory compliance standpoint, there's a lot of flexibility there if limits become more stringent, if things change, right? You have a big group of community stakeholders that are paying into that system that could afford to address any shifts as regulations change. With the two local facility options, we got pond-based treatment, we've got existing older infrastructure that if regulations were to change, would require a major investment that might take more and more to deal with. So you're right, from day one, all of these will be compliant, but 20 years from now, the regulations aren't going to be what they are today. Some of these options are going to be more resilient to being able to get there. So all of these are really like, you're right, there is a baseline, but what we're thinking about is more like, way down the road as things change, and then resiliency, you can only do so much on resiliency. I mean, in terms of like, again, you've got, earthquake resiliency or fire resiliency. I mean, you can only do so much, and some things are going to be more susceptible than other things. So we're just trying to say like, this option might require more effort to have the same level of resiliency as this option. And therefore requires, you need to think more about that. So we're trying to like compare those, and I appreciate your point, Steve, though, about some of these things being more important than the other. And right now we haven't weighted them. And we would like to kind of get to a point where we do assign a specific weighting to these. And we're looking for that input of like, of these things here, which ones are kind of baseline for you guys and which ones should be like the most important factors as we're going through this and figuring out, what do we really care about here?
That might be a better way to ask the question other than asking us to rank all 6 or 7, whichever there are here.
Right.
Yeah. And I'll note, there's limits to how we can run polls through Zoom. If there are things that you see that are kind of must-haves, things that absolutely have to happen, such as regulatory compliance, put that as number 1. Just rank it higher, and we can parse out the results in a number of different ways when we actually go through it after the meeting.
Yeah.
A couple more hands up, and then I do want to move on to the analysis slides that Kathryn has. Dave Coleman, I know you were trying to get your hand up, so we'll go to Dave and then Rich.
Yeah, I was going to say that Rich had his hand up first, but I was struggling to figure it out for a while. Hey, so Kathryn, the qualitative and quantitative rankings and analysis and rankings, is that going to be reperformed once the critical unsewered communities are, the alternatives or how they would be sewered and served?
The way we're envisioning this is actually going to be, the next step is a continued look at just the regionalization options where we're fine tuning our pencil on the cost. And so we're going to relook at the cost and we're going to relook at this qualitative ranking through a similar lens, but with better information on a smaller subset of options. That's the process we're in right now. Ideally, we get this down to say 3 options. And then with that, we're going to basically look at, okay, what do each of these 3 look like with unsewered communities? But I don't believe at this point we want to get to just one option. I think we want to leave this process with a couple of options available and a pathway forward to kind of say, okay, what do we need to do next to, really fine tune this? And I think that's, it's, there's sort of a lot of reasons to leave it that way, but one of the main is that just like, with the level of effort that we've put in here, this is very high level feasibility, and we don't want to walk away with this saying, hey, we've turned over every rock, right? We've looked at every little thing that could be a fatal flaw here. There's probably still some room for that at the end of this process. So we want to leave there to be some flexibility to pivot if we need to.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking is that, for picking up unsewered communities, there's a certain amount of cost, a certain amount of environmental impact.
Yep.
And then the increased wastewater load then that would go to the alternative facilities would need to be considered.
Yep.
I could imagine it could change some of both the qualitative and quantitative rankings of these different alternatives. And if we weed out some of these alternatives before we figure out how we're going to pick up those unserved communities, we might be missing a better option.
Yeah, no, that's a valid point. I think that my sense is where we're at right now, we've got options that kind of range the categories here. And my sense is we're going to be leaving this study with that still intact. If that makes sense. I think that we're going to have, 1, maybe 2 local facility options and, some export options on the table at the end of the day. So I think we're going to, bringing in the unsewered, we should be seeing similar orders of magnitude. And I'm not sure the qualitative ranking changes too much on some of these, but it's a good point. I'll have to think about that a little bit. We'll definitely have to keep that in mind as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Right. Let's take one more question and then run through the analysis. Rich.
Yeah, this question kind of overlaps between the qualitative and the quantitative. Looking at Russian River County Sanitation District, you've got a treatment plant that's not in too bad a condition, but you've got a collection system that's in really bad condition and apparently needs about $45 million worth of repairs, according to what I've heard. If a community was to connect to Russian River, they would potentially become liable for any violations and fines that might be imposed due to the substandard conditions of the collection system. The collection system both has sanitary sewer overflows and causes surcharging of the plant during flood events. So this could cause issues with both reliability and long-term regulatory compliance. So my question is, when you looked at the costs, did you look at the cost of bringing the collection system into compliance? And when you looked at the reliability, did you look at the potential impacts from this substandard collection system?
So when we looked at the cost, we did not include the cost of bringing the collection system up to where it needs to be, because that cost is common to every single option here. Regardless of whether the wastewater is treated at the Russian River Treatment Plant or exported elsewhere, that cost needs to be borne. So none of these districts did we consider any improvements related to management of their collection system. We consider that a standalone effort that's separate from what we're looking at here. We did, however, if you could flip to the next slide, consider how, no, other way. Oop, still the other way.
I'm not, which slide are you trying to?
One there, that forward, one more. This one, yes, thank you. So you can see like long-term regulatory compliance and resiliency for the one facility at Russian River where we're using that facility for treatment, ranks particularly low because of some of those issues that you're bringing up. And then one of the benefits of some of the other options where we're exporting from Russian River is that we now have the flexibility to use some of that infrastructure that's at the treatment plant to equalize some of those flows and help manage some of that risk. So it actually becomes less of a risk if we're using the big recycled water storage ponds out there to hold peak flows and being able to be able to discharge those at a lower flow rate to a different facility that's offsite. So we looked at it through that lens, if that makes sense.
So the actual costs to the ratepayers ultimately then are going to be substantially higher than what's projected so far in your study.
Right. We don't have, I mean, I think that becomes a, right, like presumably, like if another community were to connect into the Russian River system, presumably those collection system costs wouldn't be borne by their community. But I think Parastou, you want to comment on that?
I actually wanted to comment on what Dave Coleman mentioned and also to this one. So when we looked at the qualitative ranking, I mean, we already accounted for the possibility, the opportunities for unserved communities to be connected to each alternative. For example, 1A has a ranking of 1 and 3B has a ranking of 5. Even if we go into further details, these qualitative ranking is not going to change that much. We still have less opportunities for unserved communities to get connected to the two local facilities compared to the pipeline that exports to Windsor, just because of the location of those unserved communities. And then in the response to sorry, what was the recent question?
It was related to the cost of the
collection system,
due to the collection
so
system.
so here we are really connecting the each community, looking at connecting each community to the wastewater treatment plant. We are not connecting any communities to the existing collection system. So if we look at the unserved communities are going to be connecting to a pipeline. That pipeline goes directly to the treatment plants. We are not going to use the existing, gravity source facilities that is serving the area, for example, at the Russian River County Sanitation District. So that would eliminate the bearing of the cost of additional infrastructure to fix the deficiencies, for example, at Russian River County Sanitation District.
Yeah, and typically, I think to the comment, I mean, if the collection system and the treatment plant are separate, there were a violation in the collection system, that would be borne by the community that owns that collection system. It would not necessarily be borne by the folks that are using the treatment plant.
Guessing there's going to be some more questions around that point, given all the folks that are on the call today. But let's go ahead and move through the analysis piece. And then
So what we did here was basically said that, took a look and said, okay, let's consider, since we don't have a weighting of these criteria, let's look at a range of weighting. So we did a Monte Carlo analysis where we said the costs could be rated anywhere from about 10 to 40% of the weighting. And then the criteria were 5 to 20%. And like each criteria were then varied about those different weightings. And then we plotted them here on these box and whizzer plots. So what this means is the boxes that have a larger range means that there's certain factors that if one factor was weighted more, it might skew its score. So the box might represent where the score could likely fall, depending on how ultimately we decided to weight these things. So maybe go ahead and maybe click to the next one. So with this analysis, we concluded that there's really 5 options, regardless of how you weight these, that really rise to the top. So the 2 local facility scenarios is the highest ranked, and that's really, gets back to that cost. It's so much less of a cost than the other options, that it bears worth continuing to look at that. And then we identified the forest fill only option. You can see there's a lot of good things about that option, that it really doesn't have a lot of variability because there's no one factor that's particularly bad, for lack of a better word. So it kind of sits where it sits regardless. And then we have our 2 export options, with export to Windsor being a little bit higher. And then we're also decided to carry forward an option where we have the Forestville Grayton system, the local system there, but we export Russian River to Windsor, and that has a lot of benefits. It's very similar to the Forestville only option in terms of, having, the Russian River site really being more of an equalization facility, but instead of exporting Russian River to the Forestville plant, it's exporting it up to Windsor, which has some other benefits too. So that's kind of how we ended up with this. We're now proposing to take again these 5 options. We're in the process now of fine-tuning the cost of these. And then we would like to, get to a point where we do assign some actual weightings to those qualitative criteria, take the input from the team today, from you folks today on how to do that, and maybe narrow this down to, a smaller subset of options. But maybe not. Maybe we still have 5 even at the end of this process. We haven't ruled that out. So we're gonna take this where the analysis and the data takes us.
And I should note, Kathryn, when we go to the poll, we're asking about all 8 of the alternatives.
So yeah, I guess Todd, I want to ask if that kind of helped answer your questions.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, it's been really helpful. Thank you.
Perfect.
Right. So we will be asking your opinions on all 8 of the alternatives, but again, from staff's analysis and from that technical advisory committee, these are the 5 that have kind of risen towards the top so far. So that's the extent of the material that we wanted to present to you today. The rest of the meeting is really going to be around discussion. I'll put a couple discussion questions up here on the screen, just very, very broadly written, to get you thinking about the alternatives in relation to the criteria and the methodology that Kathryn just discussed. And I do see a hand up from Brian. So let me just run through this real quickly. We'd love to spend a little bit of time talking about the criteria, what's missing about it, what works, and for the alternatives, what gives you concern and what might be missing. After we have some open discussion, then we'll go to those polls I've mentioned a couple of times. But before we do that, let's open it up for general discussion. And Brian, you had a hand up.
Thank you very much. I was just going to add that with respect to that last diagram and the ranking of the charts, Specifically, as Sam was mentioning, you're probably going to hear a lot of this evening, but in light of our familiarity with the issues associated with the collection system for Russian River, I think that the ranking of the two plants it might be, when figured into what is involved with having to repair and or replace the collection system there, I think that has to weigh into that conversation in terms of its ranking.
Again, that cost, I mean, regardless of whether the flow from Russian River goes to that plant or it goes to Forestville or it goes to Windsor, all of those options are going to require that to be factored in. So that cost does not only apply to alternative 1A. So it only affects it from a qualitative standpoint in that, there is more flexibility under the other options to manage the flow. And that's frankly why we see, that, the Russian River only option really does fall out because though of some of the flexibility issues. So I agree that it's a huge cost and it needs to be considered, but it really does apply to every single option that you see here.
Except for the options that basically diminish Russian River as a use.
No, because the collection system will be there. There's always going to be a collection system in Guerneville.
On that, this is
that has to be rehabilitated, regardless of whether you send the flow to the Russian River plant or you send the flow to another plant.
And incredibly elementary question, but I know there's kind of a range of expertise in wastewater systems on the call. Can you, at a very high level, just describe what you mean when you say collection system?
So the collection system is the sewer system that serves the community of Guerneville. There's a series of pipes and pump stations that deliver the flow to the wastewater treatment plant. So under the scenario 1A and 1C, the water is coming into the headworks, which is part of the wastewater treatment plant and through the treatment facilities there. Under all the other options, all of that infrastructure still remains the collection system, but instead it's coming to a pump station that then pumps the flow to another treatment plant. So regardless of what happens upstream of the treatment plant, that collection system remains. The issues associated with it remain and don't get addressed. And that cost associated with addressing that remains. So it is applicable to all these options.
Thank you for that. Several hands up here. We'll start with Chad and then go to Steve and then Rich. Chad.
All right. Hey, thank you. Very, very good presentation and overview. I have a question, Kathryn, that I'm not sure if was talked about or is even relevant, but when we talk about the pipeline that's happening, that's connecting Occidental to Grayton, does the fact that pipeline is going in, does that create an opportunity to connect currently unserved properties either between Occidental and Grayton that are not currently connected to either of the systems, but could connect into that new pipeline, as well as would that facilitate other areas that are, as long as, I mean, if it could flow hydraulically properly, areas like Camp Meeker and other unserved areas, would that create a pipeline that was a public sewer access point that doesn't currently exist? And were those benefits factored in when we looked at the two local facility option? Because I know that one of the challenges with the local facilities is that there was limited opportunity for connecting currently unserved people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so first I'll say that we assume, like, the baseline assumption is that project is going to happen. So when we cost out the treatment and storage and recycled water and everything needed under all of these options, we assume that the Occidental flow is coming into the Grayton plant. So we've incorporated then that added flow and what it's going to cost to treat that flow. As far as the unsewered, I think that's a good point. Because we the that pipeline and that infrastructure is not unique to any one of these alternatives. It's in all of them. Those opportunities apply across everything. So therefore, it didn't affect the ranking, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because that opportunity, whether the flow comes into the Grayton plant or the flow gets pumped out to Windsor, there's still going to be that pipeline between Occidental and Grayton, and those opportunities to connect into it will exist.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Steve and then Rich.
I just wanted to follow up on Brian's comments and your response. It seems to me that if indeed whatever option is chosen, it's not going to bypass the need or eliminate the need for the Guerneville collection system to be upgraded and taken care of. And that should be recognized, if not included in the analysis and study, but it should be recognized up front. That in the same way with the study that we're doing with Dave, we couldn't talk about connecting Monorio and Villa Grande to Russian River without taking care of its current flaws. And so that has stalled and I feel sorry for you, Dave, it stalled that project because we can't send it to where it most logically would go to. And the reason is the collection system, even though we wouldn't share a collection system. That same issue is created here with whatever is chosen. And so if this truly is a regional study of solutions for the West County region, it's got to include a recognition of the fact and dollar allocation to fix that problem and not put it on the ratepayer. So
yeah, I think I'll just say that, the report, the bigger report that we're working on does acknowledge that there's a problem there that needs to be addressed. Grayton itself has, other collection system problems that are also identified. In terms of cost, I know there's been some cost identified, but my understanding is even those are not going to fix the whole problem. And I think identifying that cost, I think we maybe call out some of the numbers that have already been identified, but we recognize there's other numbers out there that haven't. And that effort is way beyond the scope of what we can accomplish in this. We had to kind of draw a boundary and say, we're focused on the treatment because every single one of these collection systems has its own issues that each community that they belong to is going to have to deal with. Just like the unsewered communities are going to have to deal with building a collection system. But I agree, it's an issue, but I think for this study, all we can really do is like you say, identify it. But I don't know that we don't have the ability to assign the true cost to that.
I just would suggest that they're called out to the degree that you know them in ranges or whatever, because we're going to be asking somebody to write checks. And if they write a check for this and it doesn't include fixing the collection systems, then it's not fixed.
And it's true. That's a good point.
Steve. Go to Rich, then Todd, and then Dan.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of Steve's comments. I mean, these costs definitely deserve at least a footnote. But I think part of the costs that we need to look at are fines and penalties imposed on Russian River District, which have been substantial. And until the collection system's repaired, those can be expected to be forthcoming in future years. And as right now we're out here, we're not in a sewer district, so we would have to join a sewer district, whatever it may be. The governance options are something to look at, but and the district is responsible for the fines and penalties imposed by the Water Quality Control Board. So once we're in the district, then we do become subject to those costs. And that's a very real cost. And really, no connection should be made to Russian River until that collection system is fixed. It's just been the underlying philosophy of the CAG that you don't fix septic system problems by hooking to a sewer system that has problems. So the cost analysis, in my mind, is really deficient in not looking at future regulatory compliance costs.
I guess I will just say that, that the question of whether, someone connecting to the Russian River system would be subject to penalties associated with the collection system in Guerneville would have to be part of any agreement, I think, between anyone connecting into that. So again, the governance, any issues related to how those agreements would be structured are all beyond the scope of what we are looking at here. But I think you do a very valid point that needs to be considered, regardless of an approach. And then I think the thing to keep in mind here is, like, even if everyone banded together and were to discharge to, another facility outside the study area, there would still be some governance connection between all of the communities, and there would have to be an agreement that would have to clearly define, if your collection system were to have a problem, that doesn't become our problem. So it's something to just keep in mind, regardless of which option moves forward.
All right. Thanks, Kathryn. Let's go to Todd and then Dan.
Thanks, Sam. Chad brought up something about, connecting opportunities to connect to new pipelines, and it got me looking in more detail at the PDF that was shared, and I started thinking about, the way in which the operations and maintenance expenses were considered in the sort of the qualitative data. And it seems like if you have a long pipeline with a bunch of collection systems that are meant to pick up sewer from currently unsewered communities, that could actually create a much more complex and expensive long-term operation and maintenance plan. And I saw that the Windsor pipeline was scored a 5 in terms of ease of operation. And I'm curious about that. And then, I think pivoting here a little bit to talk about, the cost, the conversation that I've heard, it also makes me wonder if it's worth potentially describing the cost of not connecting, the long-term cost of not connecting to sewer infrastructure, and the ways in which homeowners are then sort of subject to be managing the waste on their property, given changing regulations within the watershed. I think you could probably put together a pretty cogent argument for the value of connecting to a sewer system that provides an alternative perspective.
Yeah, those are two good points. I think on the agreed that having a bunch of unsewered communities connecting into a long pipeline makes it more complex. I guess I would argue that regardless of how you connect those unsewered communities into any of these options, it's going to add a lot of complexity. And so I'm not sure you get away from a long pipeline that brings flow from a bunch of different places out of any of these options. But I think that is something to think about for sure as we move forward. And yeah, I guess I'm not sure our scope can really get into the second item that you bring up. It's a really good point. And maybe one to be brought forward as, a next phase of this study, perhaps. And maybe some others on the call can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think maybe the Monterey Villagrán work that's been done has tried to make some sort of assessment of, not connecting to a regional versus having your own system. And, I think there's a lot of, ultimately, like, each community is going to have to make their, figure it out for themselves in some level. I don't know, but I'm not sure that, again, we with this study can really uncover. That's a pretty I think it's a pretty complex question to answer,
I know it came up
but a
in
good
the
one, but a good one, no doubt.
I know in the last meeting, and I do apologize, I can't remember who mentioned it, but a big part of this, after the feasibility study is completed, once you start looking at actually securing funding for an alternative and everything, a big part is going to be telling the story and describing what the cost is for not, for not connecting, perhaps could be an important part of that. But just reiterating Kathryn's point that kind of goes beyond the scope of this particular effort. Let's go to Dan and then Dave. And then I'm going to open up the poll and I'll just have it running in the background, but we can keep the conversation going. Dan?
Yeah, I just looking through the options here and in thinking of it from the point of view of Russian River treatment plant, there are two possibilities for Russian River, ignoring 2B, where you're saying all untreated wastewater flows from West County to the, wait a minute. One of them, it goes where everything goes to Russian River. Otherwise, Russian River is either standing alone or it's being passed through and ignoring its treatment capability.
Correct.
So if we're choosing among these choices, these options, that's the choice we're making. It's either stand alone or throw away the treatment possibility.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I think the option, there is, the option of everything coming into Russian River. We identified that as, not very favorable, for a number of reasons, just it's a pretty confined facility. There's not a lot of room for expansion there. There's not a lot of reuse opportunities right there. So there's a lot of reasons why bringing everything to Russian River just doesn't make a ton of sense. If all the treatment were to be consolidated locally, it'd make more sense to bring it into a more central spot like the Forestville plant.
Yeah, that option to me is the option that we're considering for just Monterey and Villa Grande expanded. The problem is even bigger. So to me, that I wouldn't even consider that.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's understandable.
Thank you.
Dave?
Oh, I didn't hear.
There we go.
So I think Todd touched on this, two kind of interrelated issues. One is the governance of the alternatives. And the other related issue is ongoing operation and maintenance costs. So Mike Thompson at one point several years ago kind of theorized a threshold of the number of connections necessary for these small districts to really pencil out, to really make them viable. And it's he said about 1,000 connections. So if we take the option of Occidental, Grayton, and Forestville getting together, we still quite aren't reaching that threshold. So I'm wondering, is that going to be a factor in the qualitative analysis, at least, about that? Are these districts, are these systems going to be large enough really to be efficient enough to be able to provide service at an affordable rate? Grayton, Occidental, and Forestville all currently have high rates. And yes, getting all three together in one system will help. I don't know if there's any talk about the governance becoming unified, or if that would still be two different districts. But I'm a little concerned that isn't, the qualitative costs of constructing these projects are important, and the capital cost is very important, obviously. but the systems are going to be left to operate. And so these smaller systems, even 1,000 connections, these systems are having very difficult time being able to do capital improvements and have, a rate that is affordable. So, so obviously some of these export alternatives, if we combine with Windsor or Santa Rosa, we're kind of getting into a much bigger boat, and assuming that we can find grants to pay for the capital costs for all that conveyance pipelines, those alternatives would probably be the ones that would reduce the user rates or keep them down as much as possible. So I just want to make sure that's something that's considered, at least qualitatively.
Yeah, I will make one comment about that. I mean, this next phase, I probably didn't say this clearly, but we are actually doing life cycle cost on the sort of shortlisted options. So we will have operating costs factored in as we move forward. So that we will have that. And I think right now we have it built in qualitatively from the standpoint of like the resiliency and the long-term regulatory compliance, and like being more, having a larger ratepayer base kind of makes you more resilient and makes you more, ability to handle these future unknowns. But I think we have to somehow get to, here's a life cycle cost. And I think you have a valid point of like, then, this gets divided by number of users. And that has to be, I think through the life cycle analysis, we should be able to, get to what you're saying at Dave, to some level. But to me, it's more about the what if. It's like, okay, well, this is great. This gets us through the next 10 years, but what happens if this new regulatory thing changes and now we got to pay a bunch more money and we're having to bear now that cost? And how are we going to be able to do that with just 1,000 homes? So I think that is definitely one of the reasons that those regional options rank very high from a qualitative standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly want to keep the discussion going and welcome additional verbal comments. I do want to open up the poll though, and there's basically 3 questions that we're looking to hear from you on. The first 2 are about the qualitative criteria. We've already heard that there may be some issues with answering. You may have some issues with answering some of these. Just do your best. And for those issues in particular, as I believe, let's see. Steve, I think you mentioned it, that some of the qualitative criteria are sort of must-haves, things that are absolutely required, and aren't really the same as some of the others. Try ranking those higher. But we want you to think about the criteria applied to the study, and from your perspective, do they adequately address the issues most important to you? That'll be kind of a rating scale, 1 through 5. 1 being there's still a lot of questions that you have and problems with it. 5 being, yeah, the criteria more or less meet your needs. The second question, and you'll have an opportunity to explain your answer. The second question is asking you to rank those criteria in order of importance. And this feedback is going to be particularly important as we get into that weighting that Kathryn mentioned earlier. And then finally, we ask you what your preferred alternatives are from the total list of 8. So I'm going to launch this. I'm hoping that folks are able to see that on your screen. We'll just keep that running in the background for the remainder of the meeting. And I welcome you to answer the questions as best you can. If you're really not able to, just let us know. You certainly don't have to participate. But you're welcome to explain your choices as well for these various questions. So we'll have that running in the background. Encourage you to take a look at the questions. Please let me know if you have any difficulty accessing them. And in the meantime, we'll keep the Q&A going as well.
Okay, I'm sorry, Sam. I don't see the polls again. Sorry about that.
You probably have another window open. It should pop up right on your screen. You are also welcome to use your smart device. And
Yeah.
just a moment. Oops. I will put a QR code up on the screen there. Hopefully folks can see that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you're welcome to use your phone to scan the QR code or use the PC input that should be popping up on your screen.
Okay, I was wondering if there was anything in the chat that we missed talking about.
Let me go back through the chat. Todd noted that for future consideration, he wanted to offer up the recent aughts mapping study that analyzed many of the community clusters that we discussed in relation to the unsewered communities. So just another data point, and I guess for the engineering team, is aughts already on your radar? I assume it is, but don't want to. Well, I guess I don't want to assume. Will the aughts mapping study be part of the unsewered community analysis?
I believe we got the draft map and the draft report, but I'm gonna defer to Kathryn to confirm whether we got the final or not. Because I remember getting the GIS from the county.
Kathryn, you're muted.
Let me double check on that. I'm not sure. I know we got the draft, but let me check if we got the.
Sam, I have a question for you regarding functionality.
Sure.
The ranking chart allows me to select everything as most important, but you want us to, in other words, it's not eliminating options in the row.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Yeah, I think that is it's an issue on my end. I would say that if there are a few items that are really the most important for you, go ahead and select those. Don't feel a need to select everything, order everything from 1 to 7. Obviously, it becomes the data becomes more useful if you are able to parse it out like that. But if there are a few items like you mentioned that are complete must-haves, they absolutely have to happen. Go ahead and select those as sort of most important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're gonna have a hard time with the data. That's all. Because everything's important, right? So unless you're forced choicing it, I don't see what you get. But okay.
Let me see if I can make that modification. I do apologize for that. Unfortunately, I don't think I can now that the poll has started. So really, for folks, Steve's point is a very good one. When you get to question 3, to the extent that you can kind of rank them, and again, it's just from your perspective, do your best to rank those kind of from most to least important. I know that it's going to be a little bit challenging, but appreciate you bearing with us.
Well, I can't actually see the screen that shows the qualitative analysis, so that makes it difficult.
Okay, let me pull that back up.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we received the final report. Parastou, I don't see it anywhere.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna go back to the list of alternatives real quickly, but I'll put the qualitative criteria back up there. Kyla, you had asked a question. Is there an alternative of RRCSD exporting to Windsor? I believe that is included in a few of these, but Kathryn, I don't know if you can just kind of reiterate.
Yeah, there's two. One where Russian River CSD only exports to Windsor and Forestville and Grayton stay local. And then there's another, and that's alternative 3B. And then there's also an alternative where all of the West County service area is discharged to Windsor.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. I've already submitted, so it may be too late to relook at that.
I can make a note of that. Kyla, was that specific to your preferred alternative?
Yes, please.
So you would select 3B if given the opportunity?
I would hate to say in front of everybody, but that is probably correct.
You can send a chat as well. Thank you.
I don't know if others are having this problem, but I only get down on question 4. I can only see down to 2C.
You may have to scroll down. They are all included in there.
I'm scrolling all the way down. There's nothing.
Well, I do apologize. Yeah, they're all showing up on my end.
Yeah, mine goes as far as 3A. So I was going to just put it in the comment box if I was interested in 3B.
So it seems like you can expand that window by grabbing a corner and dragging it down. That might allow you to see more.
Oh, thank you. I know everybody's working on slightly different systems. There should be a square to maximize the screen, the poll in the upper right-hand corner as well. You can try clicking on that. And if for whatever reason you're just not able to,
I can't get there. And I'm on a large screen and everything's fine. So
well, I'm happy if you just send me a message directly. I'm happy to share the poll with you after the meeting, and we can walk through it. We can walk through it individually. We do want to make sure to get all of your feedback. So we're waiting on additional poll results to come in. Look to staff and see if there's other input that you'd really like to hear from the group while we've got everyone together.
As a question, sorry to interrupt. I see the submit button, but it is not active for me.
Okay. And that was
Yeah, Brian, you have to fill out all the content. So none of the questions are optional. So if you don't have anything you want to say in like a long answer, you can put it NA or something.
the two text questions actually should be listed as optional, but for any of the multiple choice or rating questions, you do have to submit something in order to submit.
So it appears I have everything filled out.
Okay. And that was that Brian?
That's Brian, yes. Thank you.
Sure. I can follow up with you afterwards to get your response as well. And the vagaries of virtual tools.
Well, 4 out of 5 answered, it says.
Is there some basic thing?
Just out of curiosity, this is Brian again. Is there one of the answers that looks like it's not been answered from your side? It says 4 out of 5, and I have answers for all of them.
On my end, I have 9 people active. I'm not sure without seeing your screen. I'm sorry, I can't really diagnose it, but happy to follow up with you afterwards to make sure your input's included. And that's true of everyone. If there are any technical problems, you're welcome to contact me. I'll drop my email in the chat. If you have any difficulty, I'm happy to follow up with you after the meeting to make sure your input is included.
So I wanted to, Sam just suggested that I bring this up to the engineers in the group. That one of the things that I see missing here are multi-units in unsewered areas or multi-units that need to get hooked up elsewhere. The costs, given what I've seen, will be nearly prohibitive, and I think it's really important to include them. They make a big difference in the Russian River area for people who need housing.
So, Parastou and Kathryn in particular, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on how multi-unit housing would be included in the analysis.
it's not that we wouldn't be distinguishing between multi-unit and single family homes at this level of detail.
What does that mean for costs for multi-units then?
So we're not, the end of the study is to identify, which options, from a macro level, are the most cost effective, and provide the most benefits to all stakeholders. And so, how those costs get distributed to individual homeowners or multifamily get covered, is dependent upon a whole lot of factors that are to be evaluated, at follow-on stages. The governance structure, the ability to get grant money, there's all kinds of factors that'll play into those numbers. And, it requires much, much more study and evaluation to get to. So the goal here is to move the ball forward down the court, but we're not going to get to an end goal here, in this initial work.
So I appreciate everything you're doing with this. The evaluation analysis is great. As somebody that owns multifamily and works mostly with very low income tenants, I can say that multi-units often are sort of shunted to getting the most expensive and the most difficult amounts of money possible. And I would really like to have you think about that in terms of a high level, because like Villa Grande and Monterey, I think it's important to make sure that everybody in a community are represented, and multi-units is part of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, yes, I am not sure if, how did you or Belgian race handled if there was any multi-unit in the Monterey Villa Grande pilot study? Was there any consideration in that study for multi-units?
Well, we considered them to be, that number of units in terms of wastewater generation.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
So you considered them as like one ESD or?
No, the number. No, so if it was an apartment building with 10 apartments, it's 10 ESDs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess I'd chime in and just agree with Kathryn that at the level of which these comparisons are being made, that there is a level of granularity that in the question that we don't anticipate the scope of this study will be able to address. That being said, and I guess I can only speak for, I think about our sanitation code that affects the districts that we're involved with managing. I mean, for multi-unit establishments and when you think about ADUs, accessory dwelling units of various sizes, there are accommodations that they get accounted for less flow, or they're less of an ESD, depending on some factors. So in that regard, there's a general sense, again, related to the districts and zones that we manage, some reduction assumptions made for multifamily or these smaller units. But to reiterate Kathryn's point, it's real. That is a distribution of costs is a future detail of the study that's beyond the current scope.
It's up from Steve and Brian. Steve?
Follows up a little bit on what Kyla said that I didn't hear you talk a lot about, but what are the impacts on the individual property owner, homeowner, independent of what they are? When you're combining districts, typically everybody jumps up to the highest rate paying district and pays that. In other situations, who's going to go up, who's going to go down? I mean, an analysis of potential rates would be really important, I think, in this study, and at least for operations and maintenance costs. because that's what's going to make this more or less saleable to the general public. Like, it's one thing to say, we got a grant for $300 million and we're going to be able to build this thing, but it's going to cost you this much after we're done. I mean, those considerations are going to make a difference to the public, going to make a difference to the elected officials, going to make a difference to the doability of this in the long term. And I know it's not in the current analysis, but I'd encourage, and I know it's hard to do, but to do this in the absence of what is the cost to the user, it's just another study. We've had lots of these.
We will have O&M costs assigned for these options through this next phase of analysis. So we will be able to say this option has this much cost per year and this much life cycle O&M versus that option. What we won't be able to do is say how that number translates to an individual homeowner's rate. But you would be able to look at 3 alternatives and say this one has higher operating costs than that one.
Is it correct to assume that you're assuming that all of the combined districts would now be a single district?
We don't have it. We will not be going down that path. That's the governance and how this would all be vetted out is all to be determined.
But in the advance, I guess I had a question for our team. In the advance, after we get past the technical evaluation that West Yost is doing, is this technically feasible to do? And what might it cost? And, what does it look like ranked in consideration of these criteria we're looking at? There is this advancement report that we're preparing. And part of the strategy involved in that, I imagine is going to give further thought to what potential governance may look like, or at least what the options might be. So that may give some indication. That may give some indication of how costs might get distributed in some regard. But when I think of the unsewered communities, for example, this evaluation is not studying, Kathryn, you made better. We're not studying what is the collection system in this going to look like for this unsewered community. I mean, how much investment is that going to take? There are going to necessarily be subsequent steps of study to get at these answers that ultimately people are looking for. But this study is just going to point us in the right direction and hopefully narrow the process down to know where to look further.
Correct. On the collection system.
We are at time. I know folks are still submitting some feedback, which I really appreciate. I dropped my email in the chat. I will do that again if you have additional feedback you'd like to provide. Let me go to Brian, though, since he's had his hand up, waiting patiently, and then we will start to wrap up here. Brian?
Yeah, more just a kind of a thank you and recap for specifically being lucky enough to be involved in the conversation with the Monterey and Villa Grande study that Brelgy is working with, and also this conversation. And what strikes me as very interesting is one of the most significant topics that we talk about as a group locally has to do with what we're going to do about the collection system with Russian River treatment. And what's amazing is, from my perspective, seeing the report today, the West Yost study is quite broad-reaching and is very regional, obviously, intentionally. And it points out that the Monterey and Villa Grande study is actually very micro, kind of focused specifically on a very distinct specific area. And what's interesting is that the study for Monterey and Villa Grande can't really look into the collection system for Russian River because it's beyond the scope of that study. This study can also not look into the collection system for Russian River because it's too big and the collection system is such a small player. So just an observation that it feels peculiar that continually gets left out of the conversation. But thank you very much. All this information has been fantastic, and I really appreciate the opportunity to look through it. Thank you.
Brian? So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll for now. As I mentioned in the chat, and I've said a couple of times now, please feel free to contact me if you had any difficulty with the poll. Just really quickly, want to give a snapshot of some of the answers that we received. When we look at the first question, again, we're just asking basically people's level of comfort with the criteria that were addressed. There's a pretty broad range here with more or less equal distribution of all of you saying that you were either sort of neutral on the issue or felt very comfortable to very comfortable with it. So thank you for that. I haven't had a chance to look at the individual text responses. I know that's going to be a lot of great input as well, but we'll certainly include that in the summary for this meeting. When we look at the ranking of the qualitative criteria in order of importance, the blue, dark blue, and light blue hues here show kind of higher importance, and purple on the other end is sort of least important. So you'll see that a few of the issues really rise to the top. Far and away, the thing that many of you said was the most important was long-term regulatory compliance. Followed by, let me see, local flexibility for adding unsewered communities. That's not surprising since many of you do represent and live in the Monterey and Villa Grande area and unsewered communities. Reliability and ease of operations, and ease of implementation. You can just take a quick look at the color coding here to get a sense of how your fellow committee members answered this question. But nice to see general agreement, at least on long-term regulatory compliance. When we ask the question about what your preferred alternatives are, a plurality of you said that the local scenario 1A, so that's 2 local facilities, 1 at Russian River County Sanitation District, and 1 in the Forestville Grayton area are your preferred alternatives. Similarly, the export scenario of all flow to Windsor was also very popular. There were no responses supporting the local scenario with all flow consolidated at an expanded Russian River facility, or an export scenario in which all flow to Santa Rosa. It's very, very helpful information. We'll give a more detailed breakdown of all of this in the meeting summary that will come out following this discussion, but just wanted to give you a quick snapshot. Since we are at time, I'd like to go ahead and look to staff for any closing thoughts. And in particular, why don't we do Kathryn and Parastou since you presented, and then Kent, if you'd like to give any closing thoughts, that would be wonderful as well. Kathryn,
I'll let you go. I would just say thank you everyone for your input today. It's really, really helpful to hear from everyone as we move forward. You know, we're moving forward as we can and working inside a box, and having your perspectives is really helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, same here. I appreciate everyone taking the time to look at the materials that we prepared prior to this meeting, and kind of be very well prepared to answer quick questions, and then be ready to participate in the poll. That means a lot to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also just reiterate the great appreciation for the input as well, and great questions. A lot of very valid issues for us to give consideration to. A question to Sam, I guess. I'm wondering, can just seeing these results from the group seems to, I don't know, it invokes in me this desire to give, maybe there are members of the committee that want to give feedback on what they're seeing as these results. Can these results be turned back relatively quickly to the participants in the committee here, and see if they want to add an additional comment, if they have one, on what they're seeing in the results, what they think is maybe influencing certain results or whatever. Is that possible to do?
It certainly should be. I'll have to look at exactly how the data breaks down. It wasn't a huge number of responses, so it should be fairly easy to parse out. But with your okay, I'll coordinate with staff and on the best way to get that out and circulate it for further discussion by the group.
That'd be great. Anyway, thanks again, everybody. really appreciate your participation.
All right. Thank you all. Just another quick reminder, your next meeting is scheduled for August 27th. A lot of work is going to happen between now and then, as Kathryn and Parastou said, including the unsewered piece, which I know is so critical and important to a lot of you. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight, though. Sorry we went a few minutes over, and we'll see you on August 27th. So
Thank
take care.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Sam. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too. Bye now.